Imagine if it doubles or just triples, what an effect that would have on the economy, where the food won't be enough to feed the entire population. They're going to have to think of different sources for food. So you hit it on the head there. You got the GMO foods, you got the insect proteins, which they're trying to really push. They're really dissuading anybody from going into self-sufficiency. They really want you back into the supply chains of the corporate fives. And anything that you do, farms that are, getting a little bit larger that can supply, tens or dozens of families are suddenly shut down for some reason because they're overproducing too much food and they should be registered as a business. So there's a lot of push and pull here. And I just don't get why, through the repeating cycles that they know, and I'm going to say the globalists, the elitists, the central banking cartel that's out there, totally understand these cycles. And whatever they're doing now to prevent the message from reaching out, and this is what I don't understand, and if the cycles are known, why have we not been warned? Because I think to come together as a full global populace to work through these solutions would be such an easy thing. We have 8 billion people. We're all connected by the internet. We have resources, and then we can build ideas on top of ideas if we just start talking about the solutions. But that's not forthcoming.
Hello, everyone. This is David Morgan of themorganreport.com, and I'm doing a podcast with David DuByne of Adapt 2030. A little bit where I found David. I've been doing a weekly update for the general public for, I don't know how long, at least a year, maybe longer. And I made a consistent 15-minute type of audio, sometimes video, about what's really going on in the financial economy. And I served up like really name brand sources such as Reuters. Occasionally I go off a little bit like Zero Hedge and Wolf Richter and some of these other people. But a lot of them just came straight from like Bloomberg, Reuters, CNBC, and others. And one thing that I started noticing more and more and more was this food problem, and it kept coming up. And I think what happened is all those bots out there in this AI figured out I was saying a lot about food and lack of food and food problems and locusts and everything else. And all of a sudden, Adapt 2030 came. And that's an interesting name. And I listened to David DuByne. I've kind of been hooked ever since because he's a straight shooter. He's got a great head and a great heart. And I was going to turn it over to him, David. My first question is for people that don't know you, give me a little bit of a background, and then just kind of lay out why the solar minimum is so important.
Well, the first thing is I used to buy coffee in Myanmar back in 2012 and trying to do a supply forecast out. They talked about cold weather damage to the coffee plants there, and that seemed kind of strange for me because I'd always been a CO2 global warming kind of guy. And the more research I did, it seems like it is a cycle and it's forecastable. And you go back and you take a look at the 11-year solar cycle, which we're in the solar minimum right now. They're really good at forecasting these 11-year cycles when we come to the solar maximum, solar minimum. So if you hear about the solar minimum right now, that's where we're in, and they're waiting for solar cycle 25 to start. Well, if that good at forecasting this smaller amount of time on the 11 years, they should be really good at forecasting out on longer cycles, which are well known through history. And we always see the same three things that happen during this 400-year grand solar minimum. We see social unrest, which leads to governmental collapse. We see population migration, and then a reset of the economy. So, there's so many things that we're seeing today that are dovetailing into this. And why are we being so distracted about everything? And the agenda push with the global warming side of it, why are we not allowed to have discussions? And if I have a set of solar data, which I've studied for so many years now, why can't I present that as just the sky is blue, here's a fact, they have the solar cycles, they have the changes in history. We seem to be at this crux again, but there seems to be a lot of engineering in society, so we can't talk about the problems, we can't really talk about the solutions, and whoever else is out there that knows about these longer term cycles, that knows and can forecast them, wants to retain their power and position in this pyramid that we have set up right now. So I think all the distractions we're seeing presently across the planet, which continue to amplify, and we really haven't seen anything yet. I call it more Hollywood-esque build in the story is going to have to be, each distraction needs to be greater than the last. So COVID is a great one. And as we move forward, it has to be bigger than that. Lockdown 2.0, economic destruction. And then, we got the metals in the intersection of history, sound money, cryptocurrency, reset of government, population migration, unrest, and then governments really positioning in different areas of the world where precipitation's starting, Like North Africa is a perfect example where new food grow zones could come on if our grain belts disappear in Canada, United States, Northern Europe, parts of China. They could reset and use the deserts that are now greening across the planet to grow food. So this is how everything kind of dovetails together, and it all came from buying coffee and the cold weather damage on the top leaf kill, the density of beans, because when they would freeze, you get a little water spherular pocket in there, so the density of beans. There was a lot of real scientific data that, hey, there's a huge change in Burma. Remember, Myanmar was Burma, so when you're getting cold damage in Burma or Myanmar now, it made no sense to me. So I went looking for the answers, and that's why we sit here now, because I started to present everything I was finding, saying, whoa, 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 whoa. This is going to be the biggest problem to come in the last 400 years for our societies and humanity in general. Why aren't we talking about this? And whenever you want to talk about it, you're suddenly cut off in the conversation.
Wow, what an opening. So I want to drill down to the food side a little bit. I mean, the Arab Spring was all this discontent was really about food. And I'm just going to do a quick outline. I'm not nearly as studied in as you, but you know, I'm an active thinker and I like to get the big picture. So this is my kind of rundown. I like to revivify or fortify. If I'm wrong on something, just let the audience know. But to the best of my recollection, we had like a bunch of swine flu recently in China. So there was a bunch of pigs slaughtered there. We've had meat packing plants shut down across the United States. And there's been, and I have this firsthand actually on some hogs that were just farmers didn't know what to do because they couldn't get them slaughtered. I've talked locally, this is again firsthand, take it or not, that the local small butchers, the mom and pop ones, are just, you can't get in for months. They're just booked and booked and booked. The point is there's locust eating crops across the planet. We've got the Midwest had these massive floods, and I understand that it could curtail the planting season and hit some of the silos for stored food. So this U.S. has got that. China's had massive problems. The U.S. has the stoppage of meat packing, and we get from our friend Christian at the Ice Age Farmer, there's almost a political bent toward making this idea that eating meat bad, eating genetically modified, grown in a laboratory good, and it's good for you. So I know I said a mouthful. Can you just take it from there and really expand it? Because you're a little better at it than I am, but it's very important. If you can't eat, it really doesn't matter how much gold you've got, or maybe it does. We'll find out.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there, because if you can't eat or food gets so expensive, 3, 4x what you're paying now, the economy was going to collapse anyway. See, understand this from the beginning. In this 400-year cycle of the grand solar minimum, the economy collapses every single time because food gets so expensive that's all anybody can afford to spend on. Where if you had a few extra $1,000s at the end of the month or a few $100s, whatever your range is, all of it would be rediverted to food because of food's 3, 4, 5X. And going back through history, in the grand solar minimums, it seems to come to an apex at 7x above what the baseline is for, let's say today. Although it's higher than it was last year, imagine if it doubles or just triples, what an effect that would have on the economy, where the food won't be enough to feed the entire population. They're going to have to think of different sources for food. So you hit it on the head there. You got the GMO foods, you got the insect proteins, which they're trying to really push. They're really dissuading anybody from going into self-sufficiency. They really want you back into the supply chains of the corporate fives. And anything that you do, farms that are, getting a little bit larger that can supply, tens or dozens of families are suddenly shut down for some reason because they're overproducing too much food and they should be registered as a business. So there's a lot of push and pull here. And I just don't get why, through the repeating cycles that they know, and I'm going to say the globalists, the elitists, the central banking cartel that's out there, totally understand these cycles, and whatever they're doing now to prevent the message from reaching out. And this is what I don't understand. And if the cycles are known, why have we not been warned? Because I think to come together as a full global populace to work through these solutions would be such an easy thing. We have 8 billion people. We're all connected by the internet. We have resources, and then we can build ideas on top of ideas if we just start talking about the solutions. But that's not forthcoming. That's being pushed into the back there. And, Christian's a great resource up at Ice Age Farmer, and he really delves into the way government intersects with the distraction and the movement to get you to accept less food, the shrinkflation where you're paying more for a smaller, and they just change the boxing on it, or the substitution of foods. Now, I'm of the volition here that we need to switch our grains in different grow zones. So If hard red winter wheat isn't growing, then we saw Texas this year plant the most sorghum acres that they've ever planted. So see, that's the kind of the behind the thing is, well, it's the lowest planting in 100 years. So something's going on where there's already a substitution where some species can't grow as good as it did in the prior climatic zone. And it seems like it's kind of on the down low there that they're moving over into new crop species. But I think this should be a full discussion on front page news every single day, because the most important thing for a society is eating. Like you said, if you don't, I don't care if you have kilograms of gold laying next to you. If you're starving and so malnourished that you can't get off the floor, that means nothing to you, nothing. Food is the most important thing, and whoever controls food in the 21st century will dominate the planet, period.
Well, I have two vectors. One, I'm going to digress, and then I'm going to come back to another question. So you said solutions, and I'm all for it, and I offer some, what I believe, my heart of hearts on the financial side. On the food side, I can offer this. The late, great Michael Rupert, that was in the movie Collapse, talked about what happened when the communist empire was destroyed. And in the North Korean area, they basically starved their people to death because they were absolutely 100% dependent on Mother Russia sending them food, and they weren't sending any. But in Cuba, they had a different approach and said it's community property. Anywhere there's free land that you can grow something, grow. And so the people went out and worked together and grew food all over Cuba, and they actually did fairly well. In fact, I believe it was a couple of years, I'm trying to quote Mike exactly, but the idea was within a few years, they actually were eating probably better than they ever had. Organic food that everybody was caring for with love, and they were growing their way out of the problem. So that's my digression. You can come back and comment on that, of course. But my thought that may segue into the financial side is, and excuse my arrogance, but I've earned it, folks, and at my age I can say whatever I want. But there's so many people that are misinformed or underinformed about the true cause of the monetary problem. And so when they go to the grocery store, and I've already said, and this is just a wild guess, that food prices will double in a year. Well, that's going to put the big hurt on most Americans, because a lot of Americans are just making it check to check. So when they see that, they're going to equate that with inflation. Some of that's true, but actually it's a supply problem more than an inflation problem. But they're not going to think it through or even know why. All they're going to know is that my food budget doubled. I can't get that six-pack. I can't go to the movies. I can't even run a Netflix. Everything's going to my food budget. That's inflation, and they might start looking at the metals for someplace, if they have any excess funds, to buy some. So I took you two vectors there. I'm sure you can handle them both. And back to you.
Well, if you knew that was going to happen, that the food price was going to double, and we were going to get to the same conundrum you just referenced, you would have to have an excuse for it, because fingers would be pointing right back at the government asking, well, how did you not tell us that this cycle was here? How can you not supply us? Because most people just rely on the supply chain. They never ask questions, or just go along with it and do whatever they need to do to get their money, and they never ask questions, don't care. As long as things are there, everything good. Well, things are starting to disappear, and that problem with the virus didn't cause the economic collapse. The bad running of the central banks from the previous 2008 crash that never got fixed brought us to this point now where it was going to inevitably collapse in on itself. But would you allow the global populace to start pointing fingers and say it was the governments, it was the central banks that caused all this with the economy and where we are sitting into the next Great Depression here? Or would you blame it on something else? Oh, suddenly, magically, at the exact same months when the repo was going to the point where you knew it was broken back in late 2019, suddenly this virus comes out just a month or two later. That's way too, I believe in some coincidences, and but that's engineered. That is not a coincidence. And then we sit here, it explains away so many things. The collapse of entire industries, which would have collapsed, or I wouldn't say organically, but anyway, because of the monetary policies. The price of food increasing at such a high level so quickly, it explains it away as the supply chain is the virus. No, it wasn't. There's all these other factors that sit behind this. But again, if you're going to deflect away responsibility or culpability, you're going to have some giant other excuse. And we see it playing out in real time here. And they've locked the planet down, so you cannot take your money down to other less well-to-do countries. Because you think about, let's say, 1 billion Westerners with funds that we understand, several $1,000s is going to go a long way in different places around the world. So imagine 1 billion people with money moving into impoverished nations, that would upset the complete balance anyway. So I believe they've locked the planet down. So we can't move to other places where food would be cheaper, the grow zones would be better, the climate would be warmer, we could grow our own foods. I think it's all an engineered distraction and retraining. Because, you know, if I might ramble for another second here, going into the supermarket, you know, they only let a certain amount of people in at a certain time. So there's social distancing, you stay 6 feet apart. Okay, David, you come out of the store, I can go in. Well, that is nothing more than a retraining for less supplies when you are in a ration line. They're getting you ready for it. They are getting you ready for it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, going to a different locale and cheaper. I'm here in Mexico, as we discussed offline, and so that's very good, deep thinking. I want to explore what you said earlier about I guess it was the average sevenfold increase in food prices. So let's just take my hypothetical doubling. So somewhere along the line, Susie homemaker, Danny drugstore owner, he goes and sees the food keeps going up and up. So they get the idea, well, the best thing I can do, instead of buying, you know, a pack of tuna, I'm going to buy a case. I'm going to lock in the price now and store it, because that's the best place I can put my money. Forget the stock market, forget, you know, any investments. I'm buying food now because a month from now it's going to cost me more. So I think that's step one. And step two would be, or perhaps we would be seeing people that do have a way to that have extra funds and put it into the precious metals, because the one thing I know about the silver market is when inflation gets going, there's nothing that performs better than the silver market. So I'd like you to go ahead and comment on what you think about, you know, storing food and then moving into perhaps the financial realm.
Food will be the new financial wealth. You know, and I'm very much a fan of having greenhouses and protecting your food that you grow, because along with this grand solar minimum, you know, a lot of these changes that we're seeing where there's the extremes in cold or heat or rain, that's all part of this, because when the sun goes low and it's an electromagnetic activity state, that affects our earth too. It affects the way the jet streams are moving and how the clouds are locked into place, or the jet streams are locked into place. So moving forward, we're going to get a lot more extreme rains. And this is the thing that's really going to destroy a lot of crops, which we're starting to see everywhere. So if you're able to grow the food, protect the food, put it in a greenhouse, indoor vertical agriculture, which I believe is going to be part of the solution to restart the economy, do the jobs training, get people skills training, and revamp a lot of just, I would say, dead real estate that's out there. You know, I saw some articles talking about taking shopping malls and turning them into low-income housing. Why don't we use those same shopping malls and turn it into intensive vertical indoor agriculture so we can feed parking lots, parking garages, all these things? That'll be a new business that comes out. But when it comes to the point where you're spending, like you say, and everybody's disposable income of even having the smallest amount of fun is reduced into, you go to work and you pay for food. You go to work, you pay for food. That's anger boiling at the top. So perhaps they're trying to let off the steam valve right now by letting all these protests go, because people were so angry they were locked down. They're so angry they lost their jobs. They're so angry that things aren't available anymore. I went to an electronics store and I didn't need a new cable for my plug-in for the microphone. I was electronics to Best Buy. They had gaps in every single section of that because everything was coming from China. It was all coming from elsewhere. It's not coming anymore. So not only are we going to see a constriction of inbound goods, we're going to see inflation as well in terms of food. And then, you know, we're going to watch gold and silver go. And it's just a cycle. And you can really repeat in history. Go back to the 1600s and see what happened during the Maunder Minimum. Go back to 800 AD in the Tang Dynasty collapse in China, or even 1200 is another really good mark. Go back to the collapse of the Roman Empire from 400 to say 535 AD. We start to see the same thing, the debasement of currency, the lack of food, the giantness of government collapsing in on itself because they can't take care of the people, so they need distraction, breads and circuses. And we're back to it again. And there's a lot more going on behind the scenes to try to maintain power and control and all this money printing. Where did all these trillions of extra dollars go? They went to exactly what you say. They were buying stuff. Buy it today, buy a case of food. Well, the government does it. They're buying millions of cases of whatever it is and putting them in bunkers and getting ready for underground bases for continuity of government. You know, some of these supply shortages, like the peas last year. The peas, by the way, just a quick FYI, if you're going to look for a protein source in foods and vegetables, pea as the highest protein source. So canned peas, if you have a choice to choose anything out there that you want to get the protein and the nutrition and the micronutrients and everything in between, peas are your best bet. There was a run on canned peas last year. It was the government that had put out tenders for every single canned manufacturer across the planet, including mainly in the United States, to supply canned peas. So we're getting a lot of government buying. They're buying it now. Well, that's continuity of government. But if you're going to buy multiple cases of things, which I think you should, it's not going to be hoarding. It's going to be about you being smart because you see everything in the future that's about to unfold. So if somebody's going to say, you're buying too much in your cart, I would say you're not studying enough about history.
Interesting. This is pure conjecture, and I'm want to ask you. My thought currently, subject to change, is that the United States might or may be the last to collapse on amount of food because they'll just keep increasing the prices. In other words, with the guns or butter situation, we've got the military power, and we probably have the wherewithal to force other nations to send us food. Am I off the mark on this? What are your thoughts?
Well, if you look around the world, there's only a handful of nations that produce everything they can consume internally and then export out to other nations. There's only a very small handful of those nations. The United States is one. Luckily, we're one of those. And I would say, look at North Africa, because we see the positioning of the Chinese that have been there for 30 years, setting up all their infrastructure. Because if you go back and you take a look, this whole climate debate really locks you into 150 years of history only. You really need to look further back and see these changes our planet's been through, and just massive changes. The savanna and grasslands and small forests used to be all of North Africa, but that's on a 4,500 year repeating rain cycle. And it seems that same cycle has started again with the shift of the West African monsoon, bringing precipitation into central, pushing up to more northern Africa. Well, the Chinese are in there with proof of concept right now with a 100 square mile grow zone. Southern Chad, since the rain precipitation from above ground is increasing, they're also tapping the Nubian aquifer that runs all the way from Libya, which was doing the giant irrigation project in the desert, all the way down. So the coupling of natural above ground precipitation increases and tapping of the aquifers, it is doable to shift. And again, you got to look where the superpowers are all around the planet to position like chess pieces. Iran, another huge grow zone coming on. Afghanistan, the Indus Valley. And again, look back in history and see where Harappa was in the Indus Valley. Go back to Mesopotamia and take a look at what's bone-dry desert was once a verdant milk and honey vineyards area. And you start to see these cycles repeating. So who knows what on these more, let's say, grandiose, larger changes. And then we start getting into geopolitical aspects here. We're using militaries to try to dominate. See, they've tricked us, and maybe it was oil. Maybe it was oil in the beginning. But now these same areas that contained oil that are desert are now becoming growing areas as northern Canada, central Canada, southern Canada go offline for whatever production they have. Imagine if we could bring on more production out of Tunisia and Algeria. What if we could get some production out of Eritrea in the Sudan or Chad or Mauritania? And these places you haven't really heard of, but the domestication of rice across Africa started in West Africa and Chad. And then it's a proof of concept, but you need to go back 4,500 years. Like, who knows these longer cycles where they're positioning themselves based on multi-thousand year rainfall patterns shifting? Takes it to a whole new level there.
I like to vector off into the precious metals and talk about, can silver buy food? And I go with, I love empirical data that I can say, here's the proof. And I don't remember the gentleman's name. He did a couple of podcasts way back in the Argentina failure of the currency, and there's did one since then of 2000. And there was a documentary done by PBS called The Empty ATM. And it was all about when this currency crisis happened in Argentina. And again, I repeat, there's been one since then. But they set up basically flea markets and people would trade. And this guy went on and on, because I'm particularly interested in it, on, is this precious metals that I talk about most of my life really worth it? And the answer is yes. He was able to buy just about anything he wanted with silver. And what he said was very interesting. Now, this applies to Argentina. I'm not trying to make a case study out of this, but actually there it was better for jewelry because it was smaller units, you know, a small silver chain or a silver ring or silver earrings or silver bracelet or that kind of thing. Actually there it worked a little better than just having a silver round or silver ounce. Go take us back into history about, you know, when things get this tough on the food side. Did precious metals always play a part?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you're talking about the silver bullion jewelry, and that's sold out across the planet. I was looking into getting some silver bullion jewelry because each individual link can have a different weight depending on what you're looking for. And how easy is that just to snap off a piece, a 10th ounce piece versus a whole silver ounce or a quarter ounce. You know, when we get into this, if it does go to this direction, a whole silver ounce is going to be so valuable that most people won't have change for it. You'll either spend the whole ounce on it, or if we look back in history, beyond the metals, the things that were tradable were things like seeds, so you could produce more food, the trade of animals, the trades of tools. And we start to see this repeating cycle of the things that held value during these changes. And I don't care if it's back in the Homeric minimum, 2500 BC, or if it's now, these things are going to have the same tradable value. Things that can create more food for you, heirloom seeds. Metals have held value for how many thousands of years? They're not going to go away, because I don't care what country you're in. That piece of silver has value in the eyes of somebody who can trade it and then on-trade it to something else. It's not going to be, well, yeah, I can't use this because I can't get rid of it in another, you know, another town or city or another, like you talk about flea market. No. There's going to be hundreds of people in that flea market. I want that silver because they know that it's going to hold value as well. So, you know, all we're doing is marching back through history and see what held value. It's metals, your ability to grow food, the tools to do it, and your security as well.
Very good. I want to vector off again. I keep using that word, but I live north of the Palouse, which is great for wheat growing in Washington State. And I always use this, I don't even say it's corny, but this analogy that these farmers that have these massive acres of wheat, they've got a wheat problem. You know, even in a food shortage, they've got hundreds and hundreds of acres of wheat. So what's he going to do? Is he going to trade with me for a silver bar and let me fill up my truck and drive it home? Or does he want the latest iPhone or big screen TV? You know darn well he's going to take silver. So does that stir any thoughts on your end?
Well, the only closest thing I could come to it was in Thailand in 2008, where they were having bandits come in the middle of the night. The rice had grown through this full season and it was ready to be harvested. Well, groups of organized crime would come in with combine harvesters and come through fields in the middle of the night. And the food became so valuable that they were trading the food for the armed protection services. So let's say you're a guard that would come in and stand guard. They wouldn't pay you money. They paid you in rice so you could feed your family, because the rice was getting so expensive and unavailable that being a protector of that food source was the value for those people to there. And again, it comes down to armies. Can we have a military to go and force people to give food or grow food for you? As long as those forces are fed and their families are fed, they're going to continue to have allegiance to you. As soon as the food stops and their families are hungry and the soldiers are hungry, their allegiance stops. So for the farmer that can feed their own private security, that farmer that can then get maybe silver to pay their own security forces to protect their fields, it's going to be the way it's going to go. And I really believe there's going to be more regional trading happening, because you saw Warren Buffett, he bought all those railroads. So what does he know about rail transport that we didn't get the memo on? Why would somebody buy 80% of the rail companies, traffic, routes, lines, everything across America, one holder? 80% of all rail traffic held by Buffett now. So why is that? Regional trading, because you can send things by rail. We're sure not going to be international trading as much as we used to, but if you're going to send large, heavy quantities of something like grains, and imagine if it was just like in England in the 1600s, they would have to have military on every single convoy that included food, because it would be so valuable, it definitely gets stopped every time. So who can protect the food is going to be, and who can produce the food are going to become the new gentry and wealth class. Food and metals, that's just recycle, it's a repeat.
Okay. Well, we're both named David, so what's your reply to the Davids have gone super doom on us because it does sound rather bleak, but people survived, and I mean, people, I go back to the example of the Cubans, but the problem we have is the political class, the elites are telling us, don't grow your own food, bad, don't eat meat, bad. I mean, they're trying to control us. Do you think that the people at large will say, one big forget you and WTF, and we're doing whatever we need to do?
I think it'll come down to that, really. Because imagine if you and I and our families, and we had a couple neighbors, and we'd set up a grow garden in the back, and let's say it was 3 or 4 acres of just pure food production. We had some goats and chicken. And then the local city government was coming and say, well, you're violating an ordinance. We're going to have to destroy your garden. I think at that point, we're going to have a few problems. And would it be reported in the media, or would it have to be, the social media picking it up and taking it? Because I don't think they want to show that there's a resistance against your ability to grow food for your families. And I don't think people are going to stand for when their food, their very source of existence and life, is being taken from them by unelected officials or somebody that wants to play the power card,
So you started with 3 pillars. I think we've covered 2. What was the third? My short memory.
The population migration, which is another
right.
big one, and the economic collapse, but then the social unrest that always accompanies this. People get very angry when their food is super expensive or the food's unavailable. We in America are so used to having fully stocked stores, nothing ever to want. I mean, you and I growing up, when's the last time you really wanted for anything in this country? If as long as you had the money to buy it, it's always been there. Always. We never even questioned that it wouldn't be there until just these last few months, and it's not. And look how psychologically damaging that is for people. They're like biting their fingernails, like, oh, it's not going to be there. So it's a whole shift in the mentality here, and whoever's engineering this has definitely got their ducks in a row on how they're bending the physical reality of how we are thinking and reacting to the stimulus.
Tell me more. What do you think this is going to go to? I mean, these checks are going to stop, I think, next month. People are already agitated. I personally, been, very lucky, blessed. But I go to a discount food. It's called grocery outlet. I don't know if they're even outside of my state, but they're random. So if you see something on Tuesday and go back a week later, that particular, let's say, power bar that was half the price of a normal food outlet, if you bought 2 cases, and I thought you'd go back and get 2 more the next time, they're gone, man. And they've substituted with something else. So anyway, my point is, one, that availability is not something that's guaranteed anymore. That's point number 1. I really want to go back to you. How far do you see the social unrest going? Where do you see it leading? And what do you think the possible outcomes are?
How doomy do you want to go? I see a balkanization of the United States, where it's going to break up into different regions eventually here, because this election coming up, no matter what happens, who wins, I don't care. Or what political party wins, the other part, there's going to be a complete non-acceptance of anything. So the political structure is going to break down in the states, and then add up the food shortages that are inbound, because the USDA just revamped all of their corn estimates for the year. But I think they were offsetting from last year's floods, where they didn't really want to spook people with the losses that we encountered. You talked about the silos. Those floods up in Nebraska were the biggest ever in recorded American history. And the amount of planting last year was equal to 1938. Okay, well, we've advanced a lot and there's more people. So when we have planting that's equivalent to 1938 in 2019, that's a huge disconnect. And then they discounted and knocked down 12 million acres, and then they're still trying to couple a few things, but then suddenly they come out with this magic downgrade right now. So I think they just pushed the can down the road here. And how much longer can it really go on? China's really starting to buy now, because Brazil's not, they bought out Brazil, so now they're coming to the US. So there's only so much food available left. And it seems like all of it's being bought or spoken for.
Right.
How long will it take before people really want action because of their food price? They're going to demand action. And you see right now it's becoming more a mob demand than it is a political demand. It is, but the politicians being able to control that, to bring it back to the citizens, that middle section's gone. It's mob rule now, and the politicians are going to be of no help. It's going to be mob mentality. But again, you go back and start to see the same things again. Why do you think they had moats and tall walls around the fortresses, sieges? You know, I think we're going back to medieval past here. And you know, these pre-programming of the shows too, Game of Thrones, I mean, that was the most popular show for such a long time. The message was there, it's going to get cold. The message was there, you're going to live like paupers and the serfs again. And if the political system breaks down, the monetary system breaks down, if you don't have access to precious metals and something tradable, you are going to be living like those people in the mud in the Game of Thrones. And you know, there's so much predictive programming being put out to us right now. You see it everywhere in the media. They're getting you ready to accept less and live a downgraded lifestyle, a squeezed in smart city, completely controlled existence, and you're supposed to embrace it and accept it. And those who don't are now ostracized or deplatformed, or, you know, if you have an alternative opinion, that's not good at this time. So now add the food in. So if all this craziness is happening because of just people, politics, thoughts, what's going to happen when it comes down to real food, where your family starves or you don't get that food? It's going to be a whole game changer at that point. So you see where we are right now. It's a very soft version, very light version. Now put up the life and death struggle into that, and you're going to see something flip.
I'm going to take off on what I talked about, the movie Collapse with Michael Rupert. Also in that movie was someone that I haven't spoken about often, but I actually read not that often, but I certainly admire his thinking, and that's James Howard Kunstler. And he said for years that we're going to go to, smaller communities. He has several books. One is Something by Hand, where basically, you know, going what you're outlining. You said it in a different way with the Game of Thrones, but basically it's going to be your community and what you can grow and what you can trade. And, you know, as they say in China, the emperor is very far away. This big government it may exist in name only, because really it's going to be more of a survival mode. Would you comment on that? What your thoughts are?
I wouldn't. And when you say that, please don't think that it's going to be at the super survival mode minimalist, where it's not going to be like that. You can thrive during these changes. If you know they're coming, you can get together with other like-minded people, share and exchange skill sets, get ready for the changes, and come together as a united community to be able to still live lifestyles that we are used to today. It doesn't have to collapse. I mean, if you're unprepared, that's going to be the collapse for you. But if you're in a community that has bonded together, and it's not just going to be, you know, two families, it could be thousands of people. But having that mindset of we need to grow our own, we need to take care of our own food sovereignty, medical sovereignty, and getting everything back into, we trade, like the concept of money might shift into, well, we don't use paper anymore. We still keep sound money, gold, silver. But then we got the digital cryptocurrencies in. I'm not really a fan of the central bank digital currencies, which are being unveiled across the planet for this new central bank digital menage, whatever it is. But, you know, real tradable, hour for hour, skill for skill, value for value. And if people can get on that sort of concept versus trading money, you could live the most bountiful existence. I mean, before the concept of money was around, what did people do? They survived and were living wonderful lives. And I think it's all about the solutions now too, is coming together with this kind of, from this point forward, we need to start thinking like this, and who else out there is also thinking like this, we can come together. And I don't know what your skill set is. Everybody has a different skill set, but in the middle there, we can find something that meshes and covers all the bases in there, from medicine to food growing to metallurgy, repair, anything. There's a million things you could think of that people have skill sets to do that you personally don't know how to do.
I've thought about medicinal herbs, you know, just getting these herbs that will heal people. And there's a whole art to that. I don't claim to know much. I bought a book on it. I haven't read it, but I know you can get seeds for a lot of these plants that are healing. I'm going to go ahead and kind of wind this down there but I want to set the scene because we need to continue this discussion. So the latest report I put out for my premium members had everything to do with the World Economic Forum. And I went through it step by step by step. What they are saying, exactly what they want to do with the artificial intelligence. It's obvious they want a cashless society. Everything is tracked and everything goes through their blockchain. And they want it backed by absolutely nothing, modern money theory, where they can print as much as they want and they just control what its value is based on their artificial intelligence algorithm. So really this push towards socialism is just a stepping stone in my study view toward a technocracy, which is where the elites are sitting there in the Game of Thrones, on the thrones, and as you said, everybody else is in a Hunger Games type of atmosphere. So that's where I'd like to go with the next interview, but I don't want to leave me with the final word. You want to make a few comments on there, and I really think we should revisit this and start moving into the technology side of where the powers that be or want to push us, and what these opportunities are where we can come together and start our own communities. So back to you.
And I'd like to get your take too. So you just laid out the full groundwork there. Now, where do you think metals fit into this with the cashless society and the digital sphere of things? I understand that you're going to have to be COVID immunity passport tracked before they'll let you into supermarkets, and your universal basic income will come in the form of central bank digital currency, which can only be spent at those venues that are into the system where you won't be able to use that money outside of certain different places. So you'll be forced into a certain buy pattern. But where would metals sit inside this, outside of that whole completely controlled environment of track and trace, spend and track, habits and track, but then we have something that's completely off the grid called that piece of silver or gold. So where do you see that sitting in the technocracy then?
I'll tell you. I think I'll stop it there. We're going to leave that as a teaser for our next interview, because I definitely want to come.
Come on back. Come on back. We'll talk about it more.
We're off air, but I won't leave everybody hanging. I mean, what I call the free market and most the authorities call the black market always exists. So even if you don't have the phone that has the app that's the only one that can work in a store, somebody in your community might and is willing to go in there and get you something on their app, bring it out, and you give them 2 ounces of silver. I mean, this cannot be stopped. Human nature cannot be crushed. It's been tried many, many times, and there's all kinds of science fiction, dystopian movies about it and novels. But that's the way I see it. So that's part of the answer. But I really want to go hard on the blockchain, and it's like several things in our lives. It's a thing that can be used for good, and it's a thing that can be used for bad. And, it's the way that we as humans use it, really. So if you don't mind, I just enjoyed every minute of this interview, but I think we have a lot to discuss on the blockchain technology, the AI, and how technocracy and their planned food production going forward fits into this whole picture. Is that fair?
It is, and I would encourage everybody out there to do your own research. I don't want you to listen to what I said. I want you to do your own research. And the first little nugget of breadcrumb that I might drop out there is the reason that China is so heavily invested over North Africa is they have collapsed. The Chinese emperors have collapsed on a regular period of about 400 years, and there's been no dynasty that's lasted longer than 400 years. And I would try to ask you to go out and try to disprove that statement. And by you looking back in history and seeing on these years and centuries that these collapses happen, you're going to start to see the pattern. And once you see that and you understand that it overlaps with the solar activity, a light bulb's going to go off. And that would be my statement out there is please try to do your own research and start with the easiest. I think that's the lowest hanging fruit to prove a point of it's a periodic cycle, it's provable, it's here again, governments have postured, and you're not included in the posturing to move forward. You're an expendable. And well, thanks, David, for having me on today. You can find more of my work at Adapt 2030 channel on YouTube or the Patreon channel /Adapt 2030. Go into a little bit deeper subjects that you like to talk about that I can't do on the tube because there's so much censorship, but I go into a lot deeper issues on why the COVID's here, some of the things that are going to happen with the track and trace, and just things we can't really discuss in a more open environment here due to censorship.
Great. And I will say that for my premium members, I will post a slide deck. This will obviously be a public interview, but David's given me a slide deck that's very important. I'll put it behind our membership wall so that all of our members can see it. Can hardly wait to get back to you and talk about AI and the technocracy ahead. But thank you for your time. It was really, really great.
Yeah, thanks as well. See you next time. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.